Hello, everyone. My name is John Samp, and thanks so much for coming tonight to this meetup. We've got some really exciting things to talk about, and I am a software developer at Expo, and I want to talk about how you can iterate faster with Expo with your React Native apps to make apps that are great. So one thing I want to talk about is this app that I use called Tweetbot. So Tweetbot is an app that lets you use Twitter, but it doesn't have ads, has a chronological feed, and the design is nice. And I've actually been using this app for a long time. In fact, since Tweetbot 1, here's what it looked like years and years ago. You can see that this design is definitely antiquated by today's standards. It's got these skeuomorphic design elements, which are kind of hilariously coming back into style these days. It does everything that Twitter does, but it definitely looks old. If I were to ship something that looked like this today, people would say that looks antiquated. So what Tweetbot did is in their third version of their app, they, around iOS 7, came out with this design. And I bet we'll all remember this iOS design with these thin line icons. This is not really quite in style anymore, but they had to change with the times to make their app updated for what the world expected. Finally, this is what Tweetbot looks like today. It still has some of those sort of thin line icons, but they're a little thicker and it's a little more modern. And it looks really nice based on today's design standards. If we look at this spread, this is a blast from the past and a timeline that's pretty interesting to look at. I mean, look, they've changed so much. And what this got me to realize after using this app for so long is that the first version of our app can never be the final version of our app. And while that is like sort of frustrating because like as someone who designs and makes apps, it means that my first design and the first iteration of my app is always going to be changing. And what I've realized is that people almost never talk about this. They don't talk about like how to get your app in a process to where you're iterating on it consistently. So that's what I want to talk about today. How can we embrace iteration with our React Native apps and with Expo? So let's talk about what iteration looks like with React Native. This is what I think it looks like. And this is like the circle of fun for me. So it starts out with requirements, like what should our apps do? Then it moves on to implementation, where we actually build the thing. Then we have to review that the implementation meets the requirements. Then we have to build it, we have to submit it, and then we have to find any bugs and fix those bugs, which also turn into requirements. And then this circle goes around and around. So we're going to start with requirements. And to make this talk a little bit more interesting and applicable to something that I love, let's brew a coffee app together. So let's cheers to that and figure out how we can make this great. So I don't know if you're into coffee, but if you are, there are a few things that we would need to make a great coffee app. The first thing is we would have a requirement to have a calculator to show us the right amount of water to the right amount of coffee we want to brew. If you haven't brewed a bunch of coffee before, 1 gram of coffee, you need 16 grams of water to offset that while you're brewing. And in the morning, it's kind of hard to do this math. Like if I have 27 grams of coffee, then I have to do 27 times 16. That's kind of a lot to do right when I wake up. So it'd be nice if an app could do this simple calculation for us. We're going to have a second requirement as well, which is during making a pour over coffee, we have to pour different amounts of water over different amounts of time. This is called pulse pouring. So we'd probably want some timers. We want some calculations to accomplish this for us. So this is the app we're going to build today. So let's go on to implementation. How can we start making this app from scratch? The first thing that we'll do is run npm install global expo CLI. The CLI is going to help us create our app. We can run expo init coffee app. And what this is going to give us is a code editor and a directory structure that looks like this. Now, the important thing to realize here is that there is not an iOS or Android folder inside of this directory structure. That might look a little odd if you've created a React Native app before, but it totally works here. And you can just write JavaScript and TypeScript. Now, there is still iOS and Android dependencies that will build into apps with this Expo app, but a lot of apps don't need those native controls. With Expo, you can choose to put those folders back in and to manage those if you want. But if you don't need them, then you don't have to deal with them, which is kind of nice. So once we have Expo init this project, we can run yarn start. And this is going to allow us to start our app inside of an Android emulator or an iOS simulator. You've probably done something similar before if you've used React Native. Now, one thing that I've noticed when making apps is that sometimes the things in the simulator are not the things that actually appear on my device. Things act in small different ways. And so one way that Expo helps us is that we have an app called Expo Go, which is free on the app stores and you can download it. And when you run yarn start, we'll output a QR code into your terminal. With Expo Go, you can scan this QR code and it's going to show you a live preview of your code on your actual device, which gives you a preview that's going to be a lot more veracious or a lot more true to what your app actually does. So I find this a great way to develop. Okay, so we've been talking about Expo a lot. What is Expo exactly? So Expo is a company that builds free open source tools. We also provide hosted services that help you build an application with React Native. So we need to talk about like, how does React Native and Expo fit together? I think it turns out to be this, where React Native provides you with component APIs, styling APIs, it has a small unopinionated core and a bunch of libraries that you can use to build apps. But you need so much more to build apps. And that's where Expo comes in. We allow you to build full applications with our component SDK, with our tools like Expo Go. And then we also have services we're going to talk about soon to build, submit, and then update your app as you find bugs and as you need to iterate. And we are powered by React Native underneath in the implementation details. Okay, so going back to the coffee app, I actually spent a lot of time trying to design this coffee app. And here's some of the iterations I went through. And after doing some development time, I actually came up with an app that does these two requirements that we were talking about earlier. Here on the left, you can insert the amount of coffee you would like to output. And then if you look at the bottom of that screenshot, you can see how many grams of coffee you would need to grind. And then on the right side, you can see those dotted horizontal lines. This is a pulse pouring indicator. So now our app is ready to go and we want to actually start using it. And I should note that after doing all of this, I was pretty hyped up on coffee and you might be as well. So this has been a fun process so far. Okay, cool. So we can move on to the next iteration cycle, which is review, to make sure that our implementation actually meets our requirements. And we run into a problem here, which is how can you let other people try your app? Our goal is to get our app on somebody's phone so that they can tap on it and interact with it like it's a real app. But we don't want it public on the app stores. And it would be nice if we didn't have to submit it to TestFlight and if we didn't have to go through the Google Play Store internal test track too, because that process takes a long time. Luckily, there is another way to do this. And I'm going to explain how we would do this without Expo first. This process is called internal distribution, and this allows you to sideload an app onto other people's devices. And I'm just going to talk about iOS for this process right now, just to give you one side of what we'd have to do. So if you want to share an app on someone else's phone, we have to go through a series of steps. And the first one is we would need to collect the device UDIDs from all of your colleagues and friends, and then register them inside of the App Store Connect portal, which is pictured here. After that, we would need to create something called an ad hoc provisioning profile, which we can do in the App Store Connect console. And then we'd have to send it to our colleagues. And then we'd also have to explain to them how to install it on their phones. Now, it's okay if you're not familiar with these particular things right now, because I hope that we can make this easier here shortly. Finally, after they install this provisioning profile, we would have to create a build that's configured with all of their devices. And then we would have to store that build somewhere, and then we'd have to share it with our colleagues somewhere. So we have to do all of these steps every single time we have a new build or a new user to make sure that we can let the people like our colleagues and our friends download this. So what if we could automate this process, but without having to automate it ourselves, because that takes a lot of time. It's a lot of work. And you want to focus on building your app. It turns out we can with something called EAS. This stands for Expo Application Services, and we automated the internal distribution flow. So let's look at what this looks like. So we could run npm install in a new CLI tool called EAS CLI, which is separate from Expo CLI. So EAS CLI is a cloud CI/CD service that helps you build, submit, and update your app. And it's a window to all of our cloud services. So let's go through the same steps again, but now with EAS. So the first thing we need to do is collect device UDIDs. To start off this process, we could run a command called EAS device create. What this is going to do is print a QR code into our terminal and then a link that we can share with our colleagues and our friends. If they go to this link, it is going to do everything for them. It's going to collect their UDIDs. It's going to save it to your credentials. And it's also going to explain to them how to install the provisioning profile and where to tap on their phone to enable that. So pretty much it automates all of this process away. We don't have to create this provisioning profile ourselves or share it with people or explain to them, because our website and the CLI will do that for you. Finally, we need to create a build that's configured with those devices. And instead of having to configure something manually in Xcode or in Android Studio, we can run a command called EAS build with a profile called internal. So we can build your app for you, and you can configure how that build is made. And here's what that configuration looks like. We have this file called eas.json. So all the configuration is JSON, and this is all of the configuration you need to make an internal distribution build. After we run that command, we're going to get two builds, an IPA build and also an APK build that includes everything we need to share it with our colleagues. After that, we'll be able to see the build on the Expo website, which is going to tell us everything about the build. And it also has this install button that we can share with someone, and they can scan a QR code to directly install it on their device. Or we could do something even like this, where we send them a message with a link. They go to this site, and then it will download it directly to their device. It makes it really quick. So if we go through like these two processes for illustration purposes, before we have to do all of these little steps to get us to the send link phase. But with EAS, we've automated a lot of this process so that you can get to the send link phase a lot faster. And this is really our goal around EAS, to make a lot of these processes simpler so you can spend more time working on your app and building features that your users are going to love. But what if we could make this even faster? We also have a GitHub action called Expo GitHub action, and we could have a configuration for a GitHub CI action that looks like this. Now, most of this is setup code, lines 1 through 22, but line 23 is really where the magic happens. We've got this EAS build command that has a profile internal and also non-interactive, which would allow us to, on merging something to our main branch, to make these builds automatically. So we wouldn't even have to run a command. It is so nice. I can't explain enough to push to Git and have something just ready for you in a few minutes that you can share with your colleagues. It makes reviewing PRs, it makes sharing new features with your team faster. You can try out more things and allow people to try out more things without going through tons of process to get there. So this is really cool. Let's say that we've made it through the review phase, and now we're ready for the actual build phase for the app stores. We have a new problem, which is how can we distribute apps on the app stores? Now, I'm not going to go through every single step like I just did with internal distribution, but in general, at least for iOS, we would need to do these three things inside of Xcode, and we would have to do them manually and also know how to accomplish these steps. Luckily, EAS is here to do this for us, and they can do it for your whole team in the cloud. So nobody has to think about these implementation steps. So what this looks like in code is EAS build can have a different profile called production this time. And it's going to create an IPA as well as an AAB file. These files are different since they're signed for the App Store. So they're ready to be published to public end users. What this configuration would look like in that EAS JSON file looks like this, where we'd have a production profile and an internal profile. So this production one, that is default. So we don't need any extra production things here. There is a lot of different options we can add in this profile, but for our purposes now, this is all we need. Similarly to before, we would see details about this build on our website, and we could download the build and we can see everything in the logs about it as well. And we can also see who built it, which is really nice for working with your team. Okay, so now we've made a build for the App Store. Now it's time to submit it. Now, I've submitted a lot of apps to the app stores, and it is kind of a rigmarole that I guess makes sense once you get it, but it's just a lot of stuff that isn't super fun to do, and it just takes time. On the Android side, I would have to drag and drop this AAB file into the Play Store console. On the iOS side, I have to drag and drop this thing into a transporter app, and then I have to wait for the archives to upload and process. Now, there are ways to automate these steps, but I also don't want to spend all of my time automating steps for an app that I'm just trying to get out to allow people to make some coffee. So EAS is here again to help us out. We have this command called EAS submit. And this will take any builds made with EAS, or actually any builds at all, and submit them to the stores for us. It will save our credentials and we can submit things automatically. In fact, we just came out with a new flag where you can say EAS build, and then there's a flag called auto submit. This will, when you make a build, if it's successful, automatically submit it to the stores. It's so nice being able to run a command like this or merge into a branch and have your code build and submitted to the stores without doing really anything. Okay, so now we're ready to probably the hardest part of the journey of this, which is fixing bugs. So I'm going to introduce a bug to our coffee app. A popular way to make coffee is through something called an AeroPress. But let's say that someone got confused when building this app, and instead of saying AeroPress, they said Sparrow dress. I have to admit, this is pretty contrived. It's really hard to rhyme with AeroPress, so I just made something up, but just go with me here, okay? So let's say we want to fix this bug. What would we have to do? We'd have to fix the bug. So we have to fix this typo, which is relatively simple. Then we'd have to rebuild our apps. Then we have to submit them to the stores again. We have to wait for review. And then once they're on the stores again, we have to wait for our end users to download them. This could take days, if not weeks. Expo has a solution to this, which is called updates, and it can help you provide small fixes between your builds. Let's look at how this works. So we have this command called Expo publish. So this is through Expo CLI, and this particular one for now, instead of EAS publish. So this is Expo publish. And to learn how this works, we need to understand that our apps are actually built up into different layers. Our apps have a native code layer, which you can see here in the middle as that black version. And then they also have this JS code layer that sits on top. Now, this JS code layer is interchangeable. So by running Expo publish, we can create a new JavaScript bundle of our app. We can store it on Expo servers. And then when someone opens your app, it will automatically check to see if there's any new JS code available. If there is, it'll load the new code and it'll interchange it out with the bug fixes. So we can push out a bug fix like this typo fix immediately when a user reopens their app. This is super powerful and allows us to fix things. It also de-risks how much iteration costs our team, because if we make a mistake, it's pretty easy to fix. Okay, so this was a lot of stuff and a lot of things that you can do with Expo. If you've used Expo before, we actually have a bunch of recent updates that are new and upcoming in the next month. So one of those is that now you can build with any native code. So if you want to add in-app purchases, if you want to add Bluetooth, you can do that with Expo now and with EAS. We also have something called custom dev clients. A custom development client is your app, but an app that we add an app that we build our developer tools to, so that you can get access to like a performance monitor and inspection tools, and you don't have to use our Expo Go off the App Store. If you have native code, you can build your app with all of our tools and still like get all of the benefits of Expo Go, but only using your app. So that's definitely worth something checking out. Finally, we have something called an EAS update that's incoming in a few months. And this is a revamp of our publish system that we just talked about. That's going to allow you to do so much more with connecting updates to builds and also in the future rolling them out. So a lot of exciting stuff is coming here. Now, all this stuff with EAS is currently in preview. We have a $29 a month subscription, which as a part of that, you get early access to these features like EAS. However, next month, we are coming out with this as a public thing, and there's going to be a generous free tier, and that will always be a generous free tier. So you can use this on hobby projects. You can use this when you're starting a project to try all of this out. So next month, definitely look out for this. Okay, cool. So let's figure out how to iterate faster to get changes out to our users quicker so that we can find the features that our users love even quicker. Expo allows you to do this in a lot of ways, whether it is not having to deal with native code dependencies. We allow you to work faster with internal distribution. We allow you to build and submit your apps to the app stores automatically with CI actions. And you can also fix critical bugs with updates to top it all off. So it is coffee time. Hopefully you have a coffee or a tea or something next to you, or maybe tomorrow. I guess it's sort of late. But anyway, thanks so much for iterating with me and listening to my talk. Also, thanks so much to the organizers for letting me speak today. I think now we're going to move into a Q&A section.